Well, hello, everyone, and welcome back to Bracy Sports Media. My name is Aaron Bracy, and I'm thrilled to be joined today by Hall of Fame women's basketball writer Mel Greenberg. Mel worked at the Philadelphia Inquirer for 30 years, and since 2010 has covered women's hoops on his website, wimhoopsblogspot.com. Most notably, he is the founder of the Women's College Basketball Top 25 poll. He is known as the Guru, the Godfather, and Mr. Women's Basketball. And if you think he has a lot of nicknames, wait until later when we talk about all the Hall of Fames in which he is a member. Mel, thank you so much for joining us today on Bracy Sports Media.
I'm here, Aaron, and for everybody that saw the costume yesterday, I'm back. Yeah. I'll do a before and after. By the way, it was 40 years. And before we begin, since we have something in common, big shout out to Joe because as you know, I finally got back to the iPad world on Monday, so he was great in just saying yes or no as I figured out how to get everything on the handoff.
Well, first of all, Mel's talking about his beard. He shaved, which was cool. And Joe is Joe Fedorowicz, who is the creator of the Bracy Sports Media website and also a friend of Mel as well. Mel, before we get started, I just want to let our listeners know, if you're watching this on our YouTube channel, you can also access this interview on our Bracy Sports Media podcast. And if you're listening on our podcast, you can watch this interview with Mel on our Bracy Sports Media YouTube channel. And finally, please be sure to check our Bracy Sports Media website, bracysportsmedia.com, for the story that goes with this. All right, Mel, I want to jump right into it. This is kind of like deja vu in a way, but in a good way. About 25 years ago, you were my first ever guest on the St. Joseph Student Sports Network. I was covering the St. Joe's women's basketball, and you were kind enough to come on with me as a halftime guest. 25 years later, here we are again.
It just reminded me, Jimmy Lynam's kid, who everybody knows, Dee Lynam. I was out at UCLA one year, and she was a student out there, and I was one of her first student guests on the radio out there during a game.
Well, you've always been kind for young writers up and coming. And one of the things, Mel, is I kind of got my start covering women's basketball for the Associated Press, and you and I would sit next to each other covering the Philadelphia Rage during the 1997-98 season at the Palestra and the following season at Temple before the league disbanded. Mel, what do you remember about those Philadelphia Rage years and going to those games?
Well, it was kind of interesting because everything going on, was off the 96 Olympics, which was a big year for the women. And there were two startups, the ABL, which isn't around anymore, American Basketball League, kind of jumped in first. They were kind of fueled by the tech crowd and all that followed Stanford on the, out there in the Bay Area. And then, of course, which was UConn filled and all, the NBA finally fessed up after years of talking behind the scenes and announced that they were coming with what became the WNBA. But it was kind of fun those 2 years because if you'll remember, they, there were two different teams. The first year they played at the Palestra when they came here. And actually, that was the second year in the league. That team actually moved from
they were from Richmond,
from Richmond, Dawn Staley driven. And then they went up to Temple right after Liacouras Center opened.
Yeah, I remember that. I remember actually that was, I think, the first basketball game in the Liacouras Center, which was then known as the Apollo. But Mel, those were some great player. I mean, Dawn Staley, you mentioned, all the top women's basketball players at the time played in the league. I mean, it was great talent.
Yeah, well, that was correct. And their last year, when the league then just couldn't go anymore financially, Dawn had jumped over to the WNBA, and Teresa Edwards came up here. Right. In fact, there's a joke to tell you. I'm sure you may have used it over in Liacouras, the freight elevator in the back. If you ever came in the back, I've nicknamed that the Teresa Edwards freight elevator because I had gotten to a game at the parking lot the same time she did. And you're right, it was still relatively new. So I was going out there, to Martin Luther King Boulevard to come around the front. She said, "Where are you going?" I said, "To the entrance." And she said, "Come on, I'll show you the shortcut." It was great. So every time we have people who've never been there before and all trying to figure out how to get out, I says, "Come on, I'll take you to the Teresa Edwards for the elevator at the back of the building."
Great Mel Greenberg joining us here on Bracy Sports Media. All right, Mel, I want to talk about the poll because you were really known for creating the women's basketball poll, the first ever women's top 25 poll in 1976. And I'm wondering if you could tell our listeners the story of how the poll started and how you were involved with the poll.
Okay, well, here's the timeline to try to. I know you have a lot you want to ask me, so when I'm upset, I will try to keep answers relatively down. Although it's an interesting one, but that was just when, to use today's lingo, Immaculata had started to go on the other side of the curve, and we had gotten a new sports editor, Jay Searcy, who sadly passed away a year ago, and actually was a Knoxville guy, had come from the New York Times, and he was involved in all those Immaculata Queen stuff, because he was on the copy desk but wrote a women in sports column. So when he got here, and I was at the Inquirer, but I was still considered, what would have been an editorial clerk, but it was like teaching gym and coaching. I used to joke with Vivian about that when she was at Cheney. I said, I'm like you. And, and Jay kept throwing all kinds of things, and I'd done the high schools and a few other things, and I was writing a bunch of stuff. I did a couple, Immaculata games early. And then one day Jay calls me in and says, and back then both polls were top 20. And he says, what do you think about a poll? And I went, well, I think you're nuts. And he's like, whoa, what do you mean? And I said, hey, Jay, where are you going to get the information? I said, first of all, there's only like 4 teams in the country. It's kind of like some of those UConn periods we went through not that long ago. And he starts going, not that I was that impressionable, but it would be your poll, no matter what we call it. It would be this, it would be that, and you're going to have to teach them to do this, and report scores and do this. And I said, yeah, well, and, and then we're going along, and, he was friendly with Kathy Rush and all. So I'm at a Widener game. There was a student there by the name of Phil Martelli. And I walk in, and like the whole Immaculata team is here. I'm like, what are you doing here? I said, it's his girlfriend, who's now Mrs. Martelli, right. Judy married. And then she said, hey, we're talking to Jay. We think the idea of a poll's great, and I'm going like, will you shut up? It's just can't happen, And then on top of it, I had called the AIW brass, which was a small operation under the equivalent of Walter Byers, a ruthless attorney. And, you did it too when you're young. You're starting to make calls, set up your sources, people you're going to have to talk to. And I said, my people were interested in the poll. We'll send you a position paper. And, the AIW was, you had a lot of progressive people like Kathy,
right.
But you had a bunch of Midwest thought with a whole new thing. So right smack in the middle is this thing. Women should not get involved in newspaper games like polls, which will lead to the evils of men's athletics.
Isn't that amazing that, you think back, you think today of all the publicity and all the exposure in general of sports and women's basketball has come a long way. But in 1976, not that long ago, 43 years ago, the women didn't want a poll. Who were the biggest proponents, Mel, in the women's game for the poll?
Well, I think the people back here, I think the whole Immaculata crowd and their friends in Queens. In fact, there was a guy up there who was in the SI, was the SID. Ed Jaworski, no relation, as he always points out to our great friend now. But he was the font of knowledge, at that point, because they had hosted the second big AIW tournament up at Queens, and got a big thing. So that whole crowd, were very progressive. The people that were back here in the East, and they were kind of ahead of their time. I remember when we finally, to jump a little bit ahead. Ultimately what happened was I just went on, but I went through the year and I was getting a little bit of a reputation as a guy just, doing the column. Basketball was the main thing, but I was doing field hockey, I was doing lacrosse, and all the big names back here at schools got to know me. And then what happened was I went to Immaculata's postseason dinner, Marianne Stanley's last year as a player, as a senior. And it was very uplifting out there at this place in Delaware County. And nuns were all singing and all. And I had walked out and I said, you know what, this could all die if I don't try to do something. So first I called, the coaches were then on, were what is today the NCAA committee. So I called a bunch of them and said, hey, what do you think? They all wanted to do it. So in between, but the point is everybody was afraid to breathe under that small group. So I called down there again, and they called. And by then, word was all over the East Coast and around there. Hey, this guy, the Inquirer, is doing some nice coverage, just on women's sports in general. And so I made a remark, and I just said, hey, my people are still looking at a poll. And they said, yeah, we're encouraged by what you're doing. And I went, bingo, there it is.
Great Mel Greenberg joining us here today on Bracy Sports Media. And Mel, that really launched your career and really made you the preeminent women's basketball writer. Over the years, you have been honored in so many ways. I'm going to go through a couple of them, but besides your many nicknames, you have more Hall of Fames. You've been inducted into the Big Five Hall of Fame, the United States Basketball Writers Hall of Fame, the Philly Jewish Hall of Fame, the Philadelphia Sports Hall of Fame, the Temple Hall of Fame, and the big one, the Women's Basketball Hall of Fame. And one of the really cool things, I think, is every year the Women's Basketball Coaches Association presents the Mel Greenberg Media Award to a worthy media candidate who covers women's basketball. You were the first recipient in 1991. I'm wondering, Mel, what does that mean to you to be able to give out that award every year?
Oh, well, it's a lot of fun. And, and actually, at a certain point early on, because I know we'll probably get to it, that I used to always joke as things went along at the Inquirer. And, because, you're everybody knows you but your own house. I mean, I made a remark during the Philly Sports Hall of Fame speech about they didn't buy into it originally. Friends would say, where's your byline? And I said, well, they're using the NFL policy nationwide, but blacked out within 60 miles of my desk. and so, I mean, it was, but at a certain point, knowing who was who, you knew who the obvious early winners would be after me. And, but I kind of, as I had a reputation for delivering, and I got a bigger reputation in the house for at the last minute, taking the Inquirer Pulitzer entries up to Columbia University every year. And, things like that. So, so I set up talk to them about setting up a Pulitzer system where we can all be like a subcommittee, the way that works, when they vote. And, the association could still make the final deal, although they actually put it in our hands all the way now. But I thought this way, at least, we'll know that worthy people are winning it. It won't be some year where they tell me somebody won and I have no idea who that person is.
Mel Greenberg joining us here on Bracy Sports Media. All right, as you can tell, Mel is a storyteller. He has some great stories, tremendous stories, and we're going to see how many we can get to in the time that we have today. Mel, I'm just going to throw you a little snippet, and I'm going to ask you to take the story from there. There was a time that you once called Geno Auriemma, the great UConn coach, a baby. Can you tell us that story?
Now, actually, the better story is, and I tell all our young followers when they come along involved that, I said, I made it happen for him by screwing up, What do you mean? Well, that summer, I mean, year two, I mean, the first 2 years we were in the Inquirer. And then all the SIDs, which weren't many, I kind of gave them a reason to exist, as the poll came along. At their Casada convention, AP would come every year and, they'd have a session and they kept saying, and I was going down to that convention, but I was a day after it, and you got to get that guy in Philadelphia's poll involved. So I got a call a couple of weeks later and went up there and we talked and we grew it from there. I actually went up there with a whole bunch of stuff and they went, hey, listen, we're not ready to cover women's sports for AP, but this will light up the scoreboard. But like within 3 or 4 years, everything I had in that blueprint, we were kind of doing it more, in there. So, but one year ESPN called and Tom and Jackie, who's now with the American Conference, and they were going to have a tournament. At least they were playing that summer. and they were going to have the top 10 in the middle of the summer. He says, I want the top 4. Can you do a poll now? Well, I mean, you could be different than women, but no, we're not doing an AP poll in the middle of the summer. So I said, but I'll grab some voters that are AP voters, and we'll have a blue ribbon committee, and let them pick teams, and guys can go. And there wasn't much preseason then. And Geno calls, at that point, and he's like, hey, we Philly guys got to stick together, and da-da-da-da. And Geno being Geno, because I tell people, in the early days he lived off of me, and try and get him on the phone today. And so there were 5 teams for 4 going in, and I tried to help him out, even though being fair with who I picked and all. But he had just missed, and I had called him, and I said, hey, remember when you ran the All-American committee and you wanted one of the Berges and you pushed the envelope until you couldn't push it anymore? And he says, yeah. And that's where I'm at. He said, oh, well, don't worry. Somebody else approached, which was the people, the ESPN group that was starting to push that, became that first Tennessee UConn game.
Right.
So the end of the year, to jump to the end of the season, he wins it. It's a great story. Back then, they were the challenger. He looks at me when the press conference is over, and he says, like, you believe this? Like a fairy tale. It had to happen. And I said, yeah. And you go, thank me. And he said, what do you do? And I said, if I hadn't screwed up back there, you would have had to play the first game. They would have put you against Tennessee. You would have been nowhere ready to Tennessee. Maybe you get there. Maybe you don't. And he kind of laughed and said, yeah, you got a point.
Speaking of Tennessee, Mel, the great Pat Summitt actually honored you at her house. Can you tell us that story?
Well, the year we went in, and this was the year that I, went in.
And Mel's talking about the Hall of Fame in 2007 when he was the first writer to be inducted into the Women's Basketball Hall of Fame. Go ahead, Mel.
Yeah, and it's in Knoxville. And, Pat and I were very friendly. I mean, the world used to always ask me, she really like that because of the way they saw her and the scale and all that. And, we had a great relationship. And it was after the whole Harry Paredes stuff. By the way, one of my lines to him recently in his last year, hey, pal, I was here before you came, and I'm going to be here after you leave. So we're setting up to go there. And back then, Friday night was a big deal in the formal events on Saturday. And we were going down Wednesday. In fact, I talked to Jonathan Tannenwald because he was a young Penn student then who was part of my bloggerette crew that I let write on the blog that we had started. And so, I knew I had a lot of people going to be there by Thursday. So I kind of joked and said, since you say I'm part of your, salary, etc., I'm calling in the bill. I need a place for my people on Thursday night. And her house, she also had a big pool house, that you've heard about. So, and Harry actually was going to be there, started the early negotiation. And she called me and said, okay, what do you need? And I'm giving answers. And she said, well, just tell me what you need. And I said, all right, well, this is how I think how many people are going to be there. And she had a couple of hers going in. I know during the speech I said, they had me following Tennessee. Heck, I've been following Tennessee for 10 years now. And it was great. So we had this whole get together. And here's the other thing there. That weekend is when it came out that the great rivalry wasn't going to be played anymore.
So you had a scoop.
It was up front. No, well, we were kind of on there because people were asking. And one of the Tennessee writers who was down there a long time, Dan Flesser, he says, it was, before I came down. He says, look, we'll wait until the party and then we'll wait till she has a few Jack Daniels and we'll see if we can.
That's a good way to get something out of her. Great Mel Greenberg joining us here on Bracy Sports Media. I'm sorry, Mel, did you want to finish that story?
Just to finish it quick. So she's like giving this whole thing to everyone. Well, I can't say anything. I left the TV, this, that, whatever. And Andy Landers was part of our class. And he had said to me,
Andy Landers is the Georgia coach.
Yeah. Since she cut him, So then it leaks out that Friday, and Jay's down there, the whole entourage came. Claire Smith, I was her last story before she left the Inquirer, before ESPN, great friends. And it was great to go into the Women's Sports Hall of Fame with her as the, that special category. And Jay's like, "You going to write something?" I go, "Hey, Jay, I got a speech to make in 10 minutes. It's out there on AP." So, yeah, but I mean, it was fun.
I have a few more I want to get to here, Mel. You talked about a speech you gave at the Women's Basketball Hall of Fame, but you also gave a speech at the Philadelphia Sports Hall of Fame where you actually kind of, I think, maybe fumbled your words a little bit. And it kind of elicited a funny interchange with a very famous Philadelphia athlete. Can you tell us that story?
Yeah. Okay. Well, that was a great class, So Alan went in. Okay. Now, at that point, Alan, unlike all of us, did not want to joke about you're talking about practice, man, and people would take shots. Brian Westbrook went in. In fact, it's, every year, Pat Williams MCs, he panicked. First time it happened, I got cut on my last page, but it was okay because I had said the important stuff. And everybody started taking shots afterwards. In fact, this last year, he wouldn't stop. He kept referring back. I said, I'm the only guy that got hammered at a thing about taking a drink. And so I was up there, but it was no major thing, but you know how it is. I lost my spot for a second. So I just turned, Muffet was in that class too. And
Muffet McGraw, who's the Notre Dame coach.
Right. And Brian Westbrook, and I turned and I went, "Sorry, Alan, I didn't practice this." And everybody laughed. So now they're all kind of getting up there and all taking shots after Pat's move. Westbrook is like, "Mel Greenberg, let's go to lunch so I can hear the rest of that speech." So now Alan gets up there. By the way, Alan, when I looked it up, Alan had spoke 25 minutes up in Springfield when he had done his acceptance. And I'm thinking, like, why are they on me? And but he's great. And all of a sudden he goes, "Mel Greenberg, I never practiced either." And the place went crazy. And like Jensen said, because, you feel a little bit heavy, bit yanked. Right. And he says, "You stole the show. Look at all the people that suddenly knew who you were."
But he also had some kind words for you, did he not? I thought he said some nice things about you.
Everybody did, I mean, I can tell you a story. One year, early NCAA, 4 Philly Big Five teams went in the same year. Okay. And an opening round, I don't know if you were around that point, everybody played their home games that night. So we all got together on City Line Avenue afterwards. Okay. And Joe Champy, who was at Auburn and was a friend of Barkley, who was still may have been a Sixer guy then, came up to scout. And so afterwards we were there, and Alan was, and Charles was there.
Okay.
So, I get introduced, and he knew who I was. I was always surprised people that knew who I was, even as we went along. And he's grabbing my neck going, "Why ain't this guy ranked higher?" and just to give you a follow-up on that, the year that Bird goes in, and I was up there and I was helping the office out a little bit. I think I had already left. And they called and they said, it was the event the night before. And they're like, "Hey, can you ask Barkley about the time he got 50 or whatever when he played, when he played Larry?" So I catch him outside, before we go into this dinner. So I said, so I went, "Hey, Charles, Mel Greenberg." He said, "Yeah, I know the Philly guy." So, and he's like, he remembers anew. So I say, "Hey, my people want to know, what can you remember about that night?" And he says, "I don't recall it at all." So that was the joke. He's got no idea one of the great games in Philadelphia 76er history, but a couple years later, he still knew who I was.
Great story. Mel Greenberg joining us here on Bracy Sports Media. All right, Mel, let's take you back to your Temple years. You were the manager of the Temple men's basketball team under Coach Harry Litwack. They won the 1969 NIT title, but there was one game where you kind of maybe were responsible for them getting torched in the second half. You were in charge of giving the lineup at the time, and, you didn't exactly give the correct lineup. What happened?
Yeah, no, well, what happened, some people remember the name. Although what people were controversies for back then would be like kid stuff today. We had a great player, I remember, Clarence Brookings. Clarence was having some issues and personal issues. disappeared early in the week. So we go to Navy before we're going to go to Duke for a weekend game. And so he wasn't there, so they had switched the lineup. Now, we had to use the same lineup all year long. Meanwhile, Clarence comes back the next day. Lutwak is quoted. If he wants to play, he'll play. If he doesn't want to play, he won't play. Meanwhile, the booster club charters a train to go down to Duke. They challenge a car and all. And, like, that's the fun trip. So I let the other manager take the plane trip. So I go down. So that's the last thing I see. We're in another part of town. So now, and, you know, it was a big thing then, you know, Tobacco Road, Big Five, you know,
Right.
And I was doing everything. This is like you're walking into whatever is there and back in the Palestra, you know, which is number one in the sport. You know, so you're getting everything ready. And I go over to get the lineup. Teddy Quadenfeld, who's, you know, the great athletic trainer, no longer. So he stops me. And I said, I need a lineup. Same lineup, just put in mass for Snook. All right, so I get there, I turn it in. They're starting to announce the thing. I'm sitting there, you know, I'm sitting next to the locals, the host, you know, at the table. The Durham was a little bit different than the way it's set up now, even though it's still basically the same. You know, somebody in their southern accent, what do you think of us? I said, well, it's nice, not the Big Five. And they're announcing, and then he goes, number 25, Clarence Brookins. And then the chief looks up and he goes, who said to put Brookins in? And I studied, because see, when he said same lineup, it was like Pavlov's dog. So Clarence was back. So it was the same lineup all year long. He met same lineup as the last game. And like Harry could have switched, but he didn't switch. So now it's halftime, and we're up by 4. And listen, compared to women's world, Duke was the UConn of the day. I mean, this was a shock to the world. And a guy named Norm Kotzker, he's watching this, you know, he was technically the head manager. He's running all over the booster club. It's Mel's lineup. It's Mel's lineup. He handed it in. Of course, the second half, they put 70 on us, so we get blown out, you know. And I'm feeling like 2 cents, like it's my fault. Drew Nolan, you might remember that name. In fact, it's his sister, Diane Nolan, I got to know in this life because she became a women's basketball coach, you know. And he's sitting there trying to comfort me and all. And, you know, now we're back Monday, and I'm going in, and I figure, well, this is it. And I walk in, and Don Casey was in the assistant, you know. Had a lot of fun with Casey. You know, we'd go to the Oakland Manor on Friday nights, you know. He used to come in and yell to Harry about what do you think a guy won't pick up the drinks? And so he goes, Chief, here he is. And Harry goes, like I said, Don, you got to know who you're dealing with. And that was it. That was it, you know. And they went on. So I always tell that story every time I'm down there for a women's game.
Great Mel Greenberg joining us here on Bracy Sports Media. All right, Mel, I know you have other stories, but I really wanted to get to this because you have done so much for women's basketball with your coverage over the years, starting the poll. I would say, I think it's fair to say you've done as much for women's basketball as any non-player or coach, and quite frankly, probably more than most of those. But when you look back on your career, Mel, covering women's basketball, are there some moments that really jump out at you as memorable moments, or do things kind of run together? I mean, you've covered so many games and so many players and so many coaches. But
they do run. Yeah, they do run together. I've gone for different eras. You know, it's kind of fun too. You go to games, and coaches introduce their players to me.
Right.
You know, and I said, yeah, I covered your coach as a player. And they look like shocked. Nobody thinks I'm that old, although my little trick on having, you know, I just ended a 48-day streak at my house because I came up to a local hotel right by the ports here so I could be set up a little bit better. So the look is back to those of you that saw that yesterday. And, you know, it's hard sometimes to do some comparisons. And, you know, as you know, my role now, thanks to Malcolm Moran in 1990, calls me on the phone and says, hey, I'm president of the USPWA. I said, great. He said, well, I want women involved. So I said, great. And he says, guess what? What? Congrats. You're in charge of the division, getting it organized and getting it set up. So it's been along the way, and we've put more awards in, and it's kind of fun. And fact is, I'll give you a little hint. We are, even though things got knocked out at the Final Four, because every year I run the press conference and the awards. A couple years ago, we saw Avery Mars from St. Joe's. Remember that story? Actually get the Pat Summitt Award.
Okay.
And so I've talked to a few people, and we think once we know when we're allowed to walk on the planet again, that we can rescue this thing either at a WNBA game and all, now that we know where the winners are. And some of the teams are interested. And I just found out somebody I knew from ABL days, she's in charge of sports sponsorships for Wells Fargo.
Okay.
So we got a phone call next week. I find the sugar daddies or the sugar mommies in this case. Mike Flynn runs Blue Star. He's my sugar daddy, as he is for Dickie Hoops. And Dickie and I went together. But one of the big moments, obviously the year we hosted the Final Four, right, which was nicknamed Mel's Party.
And you picked up the bar tab.
And it was fun. Yeah, well, pen and pencil, the press club, which we used to go to. I talked to our local schools and the media, because when you go to an NCAA hospitality suite, midnight, okay, time to go. And nobody's ready to go. So pen and pencil was a block away from the from the hotel there, across the street from the Kimmel Center. And so I talked to a few schools about kicking in, I call them my points of light from George Bush. If everybody kicks in a little, we'll have a nice fun. So it got funded. I became like the hero of the media, because everybody would go over there, and the local bar rules you could be open till 4 o'clock. So I became like, their hero on that. But
that's still early for you, the hours that you keep.
That's right. I tell people, well, especially the West Coast, I live your hours. I'm like a vampire, And but one of the things we did, you might remember the Lauryn Hill story. The young woman, Division III.
Oh, right.
Found out she had the tumor, and early that year, knew she didn't really have that much long to be with us. It was a miracle, because when that story broke, she was only given like maybe a month.
Right.
And I'm ready to fly out to Big Ten Media Day, and I was going to be on a teleconference call for the startup of the USPWA season, who's doing what. And I'm reading the early stuff on this, and I thought, hey, you know what? If we give her the Pat Summitt right now, I said, we could look good. And if we have somebody end of the year, we got enough, we'll do too. And so we kind of built it from there. We did the call. I let everybody, because at that point, I'm the only women's person on. I think I still am. So I always let everybody do their business, and then I get to mine. So I brought it up, and everybody goes, great idea. And then Joe Mitch, who was in charge for a long time, gave me what everybody gives me when I birth an idea. Okay, take care of it. So I felt like Malvado afterwards. What do you hear what I did? Nobody was around to take the call. And then it came later. And it became a big thing. I remember I'm having dinner with Jamel Elliott, former UConn player, who's back there as an assistant, was coaching Cincy the night before. Oh, you're going to be great. I've watched when you give Geno awards, and I'm going, yeah, sure. 10,000 people that aren't going, because they had moved it from a little gym to Xavier. So, and I'm going, right. Yeah, right. 10,000 people that aren't going to the men's room or women's room at halftime, and a nationwide TV audience on Fox. That was broadcasting. In fact, as I got told, don't worry about your presentation at halftime. And they said, this is going to be like a Super Bowl half. So you get your speech in, and then we'll go. And then Pat showed up, and she had already been far along in the disease. I didn't learn that till that morning, and I'm like, well, this is going to be interesting, how to pull it off. But we kind of did, in there, and I did a little joke, at that point. She just smiled, and that was huge. So in many ways, I still get emotional thinking about that. And then every time our locals, do something, the year that Nova, that was fun. The year that Nova, which was the first year the Harry Pat romance, and they actually end up doing the upset of UConn, which was then the record 70-game streak when they played at Rutgers. And and they ended up getting to the Elite Eight. Well, they got to Knoxville, and they beat in fact, they beat a Colorado team. The second time's very good. Had a player on that people around here heard of by the name of Kate Fagan, who later
right.
came to us,
Right.
and then ESPN. And in fact, we have a nice summer league. It's not going to happen this year, unfortunately, that plays. So when she got to the paper, I got asked if I could set her up. So she got on the roster of a bunch of Villanova types under the rules, said to me, do you have something to do with this? Because they had, when I mentioned the last time we crossed paths, we didn't know it.
Right.
And she said, that was my worst experience. So that was kind of like a joke. So, so over the years, we'd have to sit down for more time and I'd have to kind of make a list, but those things always stand out.
Well, well, Mel, we're running out of time here on our podcast, and man, I could listen to your stories all day, and I've been lucky over the years to talk to you. I just want to let you know how much I respect and admire all that you've done for women's basketball, especially, as in the early days when no one else really was showing much interest. You showed a lot of interest, and that's why you're so respected and admired in the women's game. So, Mel, I can't thank you enough for joining me here today on Bracy Sports Media. Definitely check Mel out. His Guru blog is a must for any women's college basketball fan, womhoops.blogspot.com. His Twitter feed, womhoopsguru, is a definite must follow. And Mel, we'll definitely be checking you out, and definitely happy that you were able to join us. Maybe we able to get you out of the house and get you to shape.
Yeah, I'm thrilled. And actually, this device, it's the newest state of the art since I was actually from AT&T, able to get it without paying for the whole thing up front. And I've been taking it through sea trials. So I'm on it now, and it's going on to active duty by the time the weekend's over. Yeah, Joe, I'm busy learning now iPad iOS because, it's fact is, since I took the face recognition and had the beard last week, it doesn't recognize me, but thank God you're allowed to use your codes when that happens.
Thank you so much again, Mal. And if you like our videos, please download and subscribe to our podcast, Bracy Sports Media. And please subscribe to our YouTube channel, Bracy Sports Media, and hit the notifications bell so you don't miss any episodes. And check us out on bracysportsmedia.com. Have a great day, everyone.